The Moscow Metropole Hotel, December 2018. Head inside to room 3324. It is loaded with cameras. You're about to see Canadian Paul Whelan get framed and arrested for espionage.
It was a friend of mine. I'd known him for 10 years. I knew his family. He came into my room unexpectedly, which isn't out of the norm, for people there. I was in the bathroom getting ready. He comes in and gives me a flash drive, says it's videos and photos and whatnot from an earlier trip in January. Thinking nothing of it, I put it in my pocket and continue getting ready. A few minutes later, the FSB comes in. They had balaclavas, they had guns and whatnot, but they didn't have anything that said police. They grabbed me, and one of them says, Mr. Whelan, you're under arrest for espionage. And I thought maybe this was some kind of joke.
He set you up.
He did.
I'm curious about that hotel. Whose idea was that room? Was that just the room that had been booked for you?
Yeah, that was the room the hotel assigned.
Okay, thought nothing of it.
No, but it's a special room.
It is. 3324 is the very room where a Norwegian man had recently been nabbed for espionage. Whelan, the former U.S. Marine who'd visited Russia for years, had plenty of friends, was there for a wedding, trusted the man who showed up.
He's a low-level frontier guard. The FSB would have known who he was because when I stayed at his parents' house, you have to register those visits.
So why are you so interesting to them?
I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason. Did people over the years write reports on me after visits or what have you that were embellished, trying to make themselves look good? Mm-hmm. The FSB said that my 4 passports, when they found them in the hotel, were fake.
The passports were real. Whelan has American, British, Irish, and Canadian citizenship.
You have to step back.
And he says he has a theory. 2 weeks before his arrest, Canada's 2 Michaels were grabbed in China. Whelan believes Vladimir Putin saw that and decided hostage diplomacy might help him secure the release of a Russian agent who'd been arrested in the U.S.
It's a horrific event to be arrested, especially when you haven't done anything, in the violent manner that they did it. You're in a foreign country and people come in with masks on. It could have been a kidnapping, and actually it was a kidnapping.
He wondered if it would be weeks. Couldn't imagine he'd be held for years. First, 45 days at this prison in Moscow, then moved by train to a labor camp. When you tell the story, you don't sound scared, but I feel scared for you. I mean, that must have been terrifying.
It was terrifying. I'd been a police officer. I'd been in the Marines. I'd worked with all sorts of people with guns and dogs, and I'd never been locked up before. But I could kind of tell who were the nice people and who were the bad people.
This is the camp where he was fed fish normally used for pet food, skirted rats, and was forced to appear in propaganda videos, this one showing him making clothing. Everything cleaned up before the cameras arrived. Whelan, the center of attention.
I think they were trying to put pressure on our governments to say, hey, look, Paul's still in prison. They didn't show the black mold on the walls, the crumbling buildings, the rotten wood, things like that.
The camp was rife with corruption. That was useful. Whelan was able to secure burner phones, use them to call government officials around the world pleading for help, and at one point took a huge chance. 3 years into his detention, Russia invaded Ukraine, was sending prisoners from the camps to fight. Sometimes they called back with terrible stories of the battle. Whelan decided to use that. Is there any information you gave to Canada in particular?
It was generally along the lines of who was where and what they were doing and what problems they were having.
Who being which Russian soldiers were where?
Yeah, which units were where, what they didn't have as opposed to what they did have, the problems that they were having logistically and otherwise. But yeah, I passed that back to our people so that they would have, some information that they could use for analysis.
Trying to figure out who's. We don't know who that information went to or whether it was used, but those aren't the only questions that linger. So you were spying while in jail for spying?
Yeah. Yep.
Good idea?
Well, it's necessary compromise, serve a greater good. That information was coming to me. I knew the importance of it, and I couldn't just let it sit and rot.
What kind of risk was that?
Tremendous risk. If the Russians had said, well, you're committing espionage, that could have been a problem. However, the Russian law for espionage isn't so great. Me passing information back without remuneration technically isn't espionage in Russia.
Were you hoping to get something in return for that, though?
No, it was just my civic duty.
Maybe this brings you to another curiosity. Was Whelan spying in Russia before he was picked up?
You know, the Russians said I was a brigadier general in the U.S. Army, secret agent for the Defense Intelligence Agency. I wasn't a secret agent. I wasn't with the U.S. Army, and I certainly wasn't a brigadier general.
Had you ever been any of those things?
No. No. Why the Russians came up with that story, we're not sure.
So if someone were to say to you, sounds like you might have been a spy at one point in your life, how do you answer them?
I was never a spy. Never a spy. Not for any of my 4 countries.
For any other country?
No. No other countries either.
What he was trapped, in trouble, and bold.
I'm not allowed to give you details, but I can say that I was set up.
At one point, holding up notes in court saying it was a sham trial. There were desperate moments, including seeing other Western prisoners traded while he was stuck. Fellow Marine Trevor Reed, WNBA star Brittany Griner. That would have been a huge low.
It was a huge low, because I took the phone call from the White House, and I had to go downstairs to the control room to use a phone to officially call my parents to tell them Brittany was being released, and the Americans had absolutely nothing else that the Russians wanted. They gave up their negotiating position.
He survived by writing lengthy, slightly rosy letters to his parents, always addressing his beloved dog Flora, savoring treasured books from Canadian novelist Louise Penny and the odd Canadian chocolate bar. But freedom, that would take longer, until August the 1st, 2024, when President Joe Biden was able to secure the largest East-West prisoner exchange since the Cold War. Malnourished and weak, Whelan arrived in the U.S. and right into the embrace of President Biden.
I'd been up for a long time, in solitary confinement, you know, the lights on 24 hours a day, so I hadn't slept well. Here's the president and vice president, and we just started chatting like, you know, we were old friends. And he took the U.S. flag from his suit, his lapel, and he put it on my shirt. So that was nice.
Healing started there, but doesn't end. He's learning how to sleep again, is triggered by the simplest of things like fences, and is starting over financially. One donation that came in quickly from Michael Kovrig.
Actually, $2,043, and that represents the number of days that I was locked up. So, you know, that symbolic donation means a lot.
He has more to say and will, in time, lots of thank yous, lots of details about the horror of detention. But while he has your attention, a plea to Canadians: do not take a risk.
Should Canadians go to Russia? And I would say no. If you're Canadian or American or British or Irish, do not go to Russia. And if you're there now, come home.
Freedom to travel, he says, is something he will never take for granted again.